And um, 9/11 happened, and I was almost watching it live because, I was in the city with all the news screens and everything like that. And we immediately knew that this was an Islamic motivated thing. But I'd heard of suicide bombers before, but I'd always assumed they must be poor, illiterate, easily manipulable people. Um, and this was obviously the pilots. We knew that no sane pilot, even with a gun to their head, would fly their plane into the Twin Towers like that. Um, so, um, oh, my friend is Laura is on the call, by the way, as Sherry somehow. Anyway, Sherry is Laura, my friend, just so you all know. Um, so, um, so yes, so we watched this happen and realized it was Islamic, but I had assumed that suicide bombers must be poor, illiterate, easily manipulable people, and this was clearly highly educated, well paid, well trained people who were nevertheless motivated to have such disregard for human life. And I thought I need to understand Islam. What is this worldview that can do this to people, and how does this work? So I sort of started reading a lot of stuff about Islam from then, really, and learned a lot about Islam just off my own back, and then came across Islamic finance, and I think I will talk a little bit about Islamic finance in this, but I thought, well, I work in finance, so I ought to understand Islamic finance as well. So I then started researching Islamic finance and and found all sorts of problems with it, but also found that the then chairman of HSBC's Sharia Advisory Board was a chap called Taki Osmani, and he had written a book in English. And in this book, he raises a hypothetical question: do we still need to wage jihad in a country like Britain where we can freely build mosques and preach Islam? And he answers the question by saying, well, according to the Quran, killings should continue until they pay the jizya tax. In this audience, I think you all know what the jizya tax is, subjugation tax for non-Muslims. Um, so I was like, wow, this guy on the HSBC's Sharia Advisory Board is a full-on radical Muslim who supports terrorism and everything else and wants full-on Sharia law. So I wrote to a friend at HSBC and said, do you really think this chap should be on your advisory board? He sensibly passed that on to compliance, and compliance had a panic and sacked him from that advisory board. They left his son on that advisory board, and I'm sure the other imams also at least knew and probably sympathised with his view. And that opened my eyes to the agenda behind Sharia finance is really full on Sharia law. It's legitimising Sharia law more generally. So I was then sort of praying for opportunity to share and talk about what I'd learned about Islam and finance and so on. And the answer to prayer that I got was not what I wanted. I was asked to run a Sharia fund. So it would have been my name, Tim Dieppe, manager of Sharia fund. And I had to decline that because I thought I don't want to legitimize this whole thing. Sharia law discriminates against women and non-Muslims and so on. And I don't want to have my name legitimizing that. So I had to refuse to do that, which created difficulties for me at work. And I was called into for example, into my boss's office at very short notice, which never normally happened. You shouldn't be talking about Islam or religion in the workplace. I said, oh, in that case, we can't run a Sharia fund, can we? He didn't like that very much. Um, so, um, and I reached out for help and connected with Christian Concern through this process. Christian Concern is a kind of Christian advocacy organization, most well known for legal cases, but we advocate in politics and law and media for a Christian perspective on our culture and what's happening in our nation and so on. Um, and I reached out for help with them, and they supported me, and um, I started working with them behind the scenes a bit in relation to Islam stuff and advising parliamentarians, things like that. And then a few years later, they said, "Why don't you come and do this kind of thing full time?" So I joined them in 2016, and I ended up becoming head of public policy. But I still like to keep a focus on Islam, and I've ended up writing these two books. Well, one's co-authored the book, which is called questions to ask your Muslim friends, which is really about trying to empower Christians to feel like they can have conversations with their Muslim friends about faith, and it's not difficult. And a lot of people, I think, a lot of Christians feel like they've been well trained in apologetics in relation to atheism, but not in relation to Islam. They feel like they don't know where to start. So this book starts with very simple questions like, how did you become a Muslim? What difference does prayer make in your life? Why did you decide Islam is true? Things, questions that don't really require any knowledge. And then it moves on to slightly more advanced questions, which would be things like comparing Jesus to Muhammad. Why do you follow Muhammad when you could follow Jesus who rose from the dead and Muhammad is dead? And why would you follow Muhammad when he never healed anyone and Jesus healed people? In fact, Muhammad harmed people and Jesus healed people. Muhammad treated women badly, Jesus treated women well. All of these kind of things. And then further it goes into questions about the Quran and criticizing Quranic teaching and so on as well. So that's kind of to empower people for evangelism and to witness to their Muslim friends. And then more recently, we've published this book this year, The Challenge of Islam, which is a collection of articles I've written over a number of years about Islam, and talking really about the cultural challenge and how we can respond to it. And there are three parts of the challenge, really: the apologetic challenge, which is important and which obviously contributed to with that book. The theological challenge, which this book doesn't really address, but that's a whole another thing about whether we worship the same God and so on. One of the chapters addresses that a little bit. And the cultural challenge, which is really what this is about. So um, today I'm going to talk about the cultural challenge primarily as it relates to Britain, because that's where I am, and that gives you an example perhaps. And perhaps I think Britain has gone further down the road of this than probably you have in Canada, but you tell me as you're listening to me whether I'm right or wrong about that, because you have had some of the similar things that we've had over here. Um, so, um, so Trevor Phillips here in Britain is a very high-profile figure. He was formerly head of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission here in Britain, and he made this statement 10 years ago now. The integration of Muslims will probably be the hardest task we have ever faced as a nation. So forget World War II, forget World War One, forget the plague, forget what, yeah, the hardest task we've ever faced as a nation, integrating Muslims. That's a very, very bold statement for him to make, and he made it 10 years ago. And he, nothing has got easier in the intervening 10 years. It's got a lot worse than it was 10 years ago in terms of what he was seeing at that point. There's a video, I think this is from last year, maybe the year before actually, of some Muslims discussing Britain, and they say this: when you look outside in London, you would think you're in a second Afghanistan, but you're in Londonistan. You are not a subjugated minority, you are the leaders of humanity. So the Muslims kind of think they've taken over, at least in parts of London, or at least in parts of Britain. They believe they've taken over. They're telling people we basically have taken over this place now. And certainly if you go to certain parts of London, you will not feel like a Western country. It will feel like an Islamic country. There are lots and lots of Islamic displays and Islamic shops and all of that kind of thing. I'll show you some images in a minute. Last year, there was an attempt to blockade Parliament by some pro-Palestinian protesters. They actually intended to say that they had to force Parliament to go into lockdown for security because they surrounded Parliament and intended to make it unsafe to come out or in of the actual Parliament buildings. They projected an anti-Semitic chant onto Parliament itself, which you can see here. From the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free was projected onto Big Ben, the famous iconic Parliament building here in London. And the Speaker of the Parliament broke with parliamentary convention over safety fear. So this attempt caused Parliament to break with its convention over safety concerns. That's a very significant moment in our parliamentary history for Muslims to have forced a change of parliamentary convention over the fears of safety. They were debating at the time Gaza, and this happened. In response to that, the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman said Islamists are in charge now. She said, the truth is that the Islamists, the extremists, the anti-Semites are in charge now. They've bullied the Labour Party, they've bullied our institutions, and now they've bullied our country in submission. This is a crisis, and the fight back must start now with urgency if we're to preserve the liberties we cherish, the privileges this country affords us all, to have any chance of saving our country from the mob. A very strong statement for a former Home Secretary to make. That was made in February last year, and things have only progressed since then. To take a step back and look at the demographics more generally, um, as of the last census back in 2021, there were 3.9 million Muslims, or 6.5% of the population. Back in 1960, which is only 50, 60 years ago now, it was only 100,000. So it's the rapid growth since then. The Pew Research Centre some while ago estimated that we'd get to 17% of the population by 2050. Already 10% of all higher education students are Muslims, and 18% of the prison population is Muslim as well. So obviously vastly overrepresented in the prison population there. And in certain areas, you have 30% plus Muslim population, according to the last census again. And in certain sections or wards of those areas, it will be over 50% Muslim. And the most popular boy's name in the country is Mohammed. And in fact, it has been Mohammed every year since 2011, when you allow for spelling variations, because there are not spelling variations of George or Oliver or Noah, but there are about 5 or 6 different spelling variations of Mohammed. Last year, for the first time, the latest data is 2023, it came out top even without allowing for spelling variations, but it has been the most popular name since 2011. That's 15 years now running for boys. Another way of looking at it is this, to say that the average age of the population in England and Wales as of the census is 40 years old. The average age of Christians is 51. And the average age of Muslims is 27. That sort of shows your problem right there. In a way, in a sense, that is the issue. And in a sense, you've got a young, vibrant, growing Muslim population and an old, slowing down, less energetic, dying Christian population, and that is emblematic of where we are as a culture. A couple of years ago, this chap Ed Hussein published this book called Among the Mosques. What he did, he is a moderate Muslim, and he went into all the biggest mosques in the country: London, Birmingham, Glasgow, Manchester, and so on. And he wrote about his experiences doing that. He said, as a Muslim, that in most of these towns, or many of these towns, there are no-go areas for non-Muslims. Muslims are just not welcome there, and would not be safe to go there. In some areas, major retailers, all our major chains, have deserted those areas. There are no pubs anymore. There are no standard restaurants, chain restaurants, all that kind of thing there. Women are segregated and veiled, and fundamental literature of the kind banned in Saudi Arabia is freely on sale in virtually every Islamic bookshop. That's striking, isn't it? Saudi Arabia, the kind of stuff that Saudi Arabia bans, you can get easily in any of the bookshops here in London. That's that shows you the kind of the blindness to the challenge that there is here in Britain. Last year we had a general election, and for the first time there was an explicitly Muslim campaign called the Muslim Vote. They put out a list of all the constituencies where there's over 10% Muslim population or Muslim vote there. You can see that for some of them it's actually, or one or two of them, it's over 50%. And that list there is all the ones they listed as over 30%. So there were many more that were over 10%. You had MPs campaigning on the back of a Muslim thing. In fact, Muslim Vote got their calculations wrong. The Muslims are actually over 50% population in 4 constituencies. And the change is significant. In 2011, Muslims represented 25% of the population in 21 constituencies. And then last year was 30 constituencies. Again, in 2011, more than 10% of the population, 82 constituencies, now 120 constituencies. When you think that the difference between winning and losing is normally less than 10% of the vote, that means Muslims can swing the vote in 120 constituencies in our general election. We had 5 independent candidates backed by Muslim votes who are now members of parliament in our country. This chap, Shokat Adam, is now MP for Leicester South. he had election leaflets that appeared to contravene election rules by not stating who produced them. You're meant to have strict rules about that kind of thing and all the costing about how much money you spend. Shoka Adams' brother has expressed clear support for Hamas and praised the Palestinian gunman shot dead after murdering a Jewish tour guide as a martyr. And another supporter of his has been charged with encouragement of terrorism and convicted of public order offence during Leicester riots. And another candidate who didn't become an MP was detained under the Terrorism Act in January this year and had previously paid damages for defamation to a young teacher. Here's another chap who is now a member of parliament. He told hundreds of worshippers to follow the teaching of the prophet and vote for him just days before the election, and warned voters that if they failed to vote, Allah will ask them, I gave you this blessing, what do you do with it? And Muslims have a duty to vote for just representatives, and gestured to an imam before saying, with the ulama as my witness, I promise to try and be that just representative. There are laws in this country called undue spiritual influence laws that mean that it's illegal to spiritually pressurize people to vote a particular way and say, if you vote this way, you're not a true Christian, you're not a true Muslim, or something like that. So these comments most likely break those laws. Nevertheless, he's now a member of parliament, and that's where we are. Muslim Vote themselves claimed that 50 candidates that they endorsed won seats in parliament. So now have 50 MPs who back the Muslim Votes campaign and back Muslim Votes demands. Here are their demands. Recognise a Palestinian state, end the military ties of Israel, allow Muslims to pray at school, that's because of a legal case, which I'll tell you about, adopt the APPG definition of Islamophobia, I'll come on to talk about that as well. They want Sharia-compliant pensions at every workplace, we'll talk about Islamic finance in a minute. And they want to remove the spiritual influence law, that's the law I was talking about, where you can't say, you must vote for me, otherwise you're a bad Muslim. They want to be able to do that. Labour is very aware that they lost the Labour vote in the last election. There's a direct correlation, how many Muslims in the constituency to the portion of vote share change that Labour had. So if there's 50% Muslim vote, they lost 40% of the votes. And if there's 40% Muslim vote, they lost 30% of the votes. It's like that. It's pretty much a straight line correlation. In high Muslim areas, they all voted for these independent candidates, and that cost the Labour Party some seats and narrowed margins very, very significantly for the Labour Party. I expect that by the next election, we will have a fully fledged Islamic political party running in our national elections. I think the Muslim vote was a step towards that, and I think we'll now have a national Islamic party. We already have a local council that is run by an Islamic party. This Islamic party is called Aspire. It's exclusively British Bangladeshi Muslim men. There is no website for this political party. There is no press inquiries. There's no publicly available constitution. The mayor of Tower Hamlets was previously found guilty of bribing local media, instrumentalizing grants to pro command, exerting undue spiritual influence. The first person convicted of that offence for something like 100 years by using imams to persuade Muslims to vote for him. So because of those offences, he was banned from holding electoral office for 5 years. 5 years later, he came back, and now he's mayor. So we have a fully Muslim-controlled local council here in Britain, and they use council funds to promote Muslim projects, Islamic projects, and so on. All of that kind of thing is happening in that area. It's one of the highest Muslim areas in the country. Last year, we had some polling that showed that only 24% of British Muslims believe Hamas committed the atrocities on October the 7th, 29% have a positive view of Hamas, 21% support legalizing polygamy, 32% support Sharia law, 57% halal food in all schools and hospitals, and 52% think it should be legal to show an image of Muhammad. So it shows strong portions, not always a majority, but nevertheless significant minorities supporting these various quite radical ideas. And just to give you an example, and there are lots of examples now of the influence on our culture, this school was named one of the best primary school in England in 2017, and they wanted to ban girls under 8 years old from wearing the hijab in school, and the Muslims kicked up a fuss and had a big protest about it. They asked the government to support them. The government didn't really stand up to support them. even though standard Islamic teaching doesn't require the hijab until puberty, in the end, the school backed down after a coordinated campaign of bullying and harassment, leading the chair of governors to resign. And it came out that there are some 150 schools where the hijab is compulsory in Britain. And now, what school is going to stand up to pressure from Muslims now to say, no, we're not going to have the hijab in school uniform? It's just a significant cultural battleground in schools and so on. Another example of that. This is a meeting of the All-Party Parliamentary Group of British Muslims, an influential group of parliamentarians. You can see what they're doing there. I know there are Christians that pray in Parliament as well, but you can see how seriously they're taking what they do over in Parliament there. These are multiple national chains of restaurants, supermarkets that serve halal food, or the chicken or beef will be halal slaughtered without being labelled that way. Britain has now a 2.6 billion halal market, one of the biggest halal markets in Europe, and most people eat halal food without realizing it on a daily basis. Basically, halal has pretty much taken over our abattoir industry. And last year, there was a massive international investment summit. And guess what was showcased? The best of British produce. And the VIP information pack said the main summit menu is halal. And there'll be no alcohol served on this day. So very much wanting to make it Islam friendly. This is a big fashion show. You can see there just a cultural thing. Thousands of women in Iran risk imprisonment by burning hijabs and protesting against wearing hijabs, but here we are celebrating it in London and promoting it in London. This group claim 350,000 people went to the big Eid takeover in a certain destination in London. That is way bigger than any Christian festival in the whole of Europe. 350,000 people for this Islamic festival gives you an idea of the influence there. This happened last year. I don't know if you can read that, but this is at King's Cross Station, which is one of the biggest train stations in London, major hub of trains, and they had Hadith of the Day on the main leaderboard of times of trains. They only stopped it after it was publicized and people kicked up a fuss about it. They've never had Bible verse of the day, but they did have Hadith of the Day displayed on there. These are just images from Britain, so you can see you wouldn't know you're in Britain if you saw these things, would you? It's just last year, this is Ramadan, but it was also Easter. So we had Ramadan lights in London over Easter. We didn't have Easter lights, we had Ramadan lights. So guess which religion is given more deference and more priority and it's more significant in our culture. This year, Windsor Castle, where one of the king's residences, royal residency, they hosted an open iftar there, and the call to prayer was chanted, which you probably know says there's no God but Allah, Muhammad is his prophet. A significant thing of just welcoming Islam into the royal family and royal residence there, and so, sort of celebrating Islam almost more than Easter, it seems. And during the period of Ramadan, there are adverts for Islamic relief, and you see these posters all over the place showing that, advertising that, and on buses as well and things. There are Sharia councils operating in Britain. We don't know how many, 85, 100, who knows. Undercover journalists and academic researchers have found evidence of systematic discrimination against women in these councils, and a government independent inquiry has confirmed that discrimination is happening in these councils. Nevertheless, they still continue, and this is kind of a parallel legal system where disputes are not resolved by reference to British courts and British legal system, they're resolved by reference to Sharia law. So we're creating a kind of parallel culture and a parallel legal system by allowing this to happen in our country. You had this in Canada as well, but you managed to outlaw it in a particular area. I think it was Victoria. We haven't done what you've done, unfortunately. Um, this was a couple of years ago. One of our MPs was actually assassinated by a Muslim. The killer was unashamed of his Islamic motives. He said that he was struck by a verse in the Quran which says, "Strike them wherever you find them." He said to the court, "If you encourage someone to an act of jihad, it's a good thing." He said, "I killed him in the cause of Muslims and for the sake of Allah." Um, and It was very, very clearly Islamic motivated. Um, but I remember being struck because in the debate in Parliament following this, the debate was not about Islam, the debate was about social media. And they were all blaming social media for encouraging hatred, but not talking about Islam, even though the killer had clearly stated his motive was Islamic. They didn't want to go there, they didn't want to talk about that. He's not the first MP to be attacked by a Muslim. Another MP, Stephen Timms, was stabbed by a Muslim woman with Islamic motives back in 2010 and was very fortunate to survive the attack. So we've seen assassinations or assassination attempts on members of parliament now. And then furthermore, we saw last year an MP say, "I'm not going to stand again because of threats to his personal safety." He mentioned a group called Muslims Against Crusades. And he knows that the chap who murdered Sir David Ames had thought about or considered murdering him instead, or first of all, and there was a suspected arson attack on his constituency. Police advisor were steadfast. He's like, "I'm out of this." So the point is, like, MPs. It takes a lot of courage now in Britain to speak up about Islam, and it includes personal threats to your safety and all that kind of thing. So this is influencing our democracy now by threats of violence and sometimes actual violence, and that's a real issue for our politicians today. Notwithstanding the wanting to keep the votes, there's also safety as well concerns that go on here. And then Islamic finance I mentioned. Islamic finance is actually based on a modern radical interpretation of the Quran. The view that Islam prohibits interest is a modern radical view. Most Muslims throughout Islamic history and Muslims today as well are very happy to borrow and lend with interest. But that is they've somehow persuaded big financial institutions and even governments that the Quran prohibits interest when actually it only really prohibits usury according to standard interpretations. And there are also ethical investments and things like that that they involve themselves in. You have Sharia advisory boards, and as I indicated earlier, it lends credibility to Sharia law. There are now 5 Islamic banks in Britain and 12 lenders offering Islamic financial products, more than any other Western country. Britain is the first non-Muslim country to issue a government Sharia bond. We now have 2 government Sharia bonds that are governed by Sharia law, and they're deliberately promoting this and trying to become a centre of Islamic finance. And the Bank of England recently facilitated deposit from Islamic banks paying returns rather than interest. I mean, it's basically calling it returns rather than interest when it's really interest. It's a deceptive game, Islamic finance. So we're promoting this, and that's all going on as well. And I mentioned that prisons are overrepresented by Islam, or Islam overrepresented in prisons, and there have been a number of reports about Islamic gangs controlling prison wings, imposing Sharia law, flogging prisoners who breach things, conversions to Islam for perceived benefits, and convert or get hurt being used by Muslim gangs. Copies of the Quran left on beds of prisoners to test their reaction. I met somebody who visited a prison recently and was shocked to find that one of the key, leader characters in the prison refused to get out of his cell. He had converted to Islam, but he had refused to say that he would engage in terrorism when he got out of the prison. And for that reason, he was afraid for his safety and wouldn't leave the prison. Even though he'd converted to Islam, that kind of gives you an indication of what it's like. The whole rape gang thing has hit international news, so probably the people on this call have heard of it. And when I first talked about this, most people would not have heard of it, even in this country, let's say internationally. But this is a horror story. There are many, many thousands of girls who've been raped by these Islamic gangs, and the police and local authorities and social services all turned a blind eye. We're finally getting quite a lot of attention on this now because of Elon Musk and so on. The government resisted having a national inquiry even this year, but then they did get somebody to investigate it, and she said, no, this does need a national inquiry. It's been going on for 40 years. It's in up to 50 plus towns where we found these gangs, and and everyone's been very shy of talking about the racial element because they are all Pakistani Muslims. They're still shy of talking about the religious element of this. That very often they're taught, they refer to their victims as kafir and use Islamic language and even give them Islamic names, and sometimes Sharia marriages and so on. This is all a factor in the abuse that's going on, and there are Quranic verses that are used to justify this kind of stuff. And there are a number of books now written by some of these victims. Sally Woodhouse is one of the famous victims who was one of the initial whistleblowers. The police caught her having sex with her abuser and charged her with possession of an offensive weapon and didn't charge him, even though underage sex is illegal in this country. A crime was being committed in front of their eyes, and they didn't want to bother charging him with that. It's exactly the kind of thing that happened quite a lot. A lot of times that's happened. She commented in the book that she let him groom her son into Islam, showing the Islamic connection here. So that's kind of very much a factor, but and very much in the public eye now, which is a good thing. And people starting to talk about it, and more people now are starting to talk about the Islamic connection on this, which is encouraging. Just last year, we had a chap who was imprisoned for saying, "Who the F is Allah?" Nobody has been in prison, as far as I'm aware, for saying, "Who the F is Jesus?" He's not accused of any actual violence or anything like that. It was just what he said. Meanwhile, people who chant from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, no arrest or prison for them. So there's very much a feeling that there's two-tier policing here, and when you insult Islam, the police will come down you like a ton of bricks. Insult Christianity or Jews, and they won't. This was a major conference in one of our major conference centres, the Excel Centre in London, 50,000 people, looks all very above board. And then, but if you went there, they had a booklet which said, use resistance instead of terrorism. Resistance is lawful and legally protected and all of this kind of stuff. So it's basically defending terrorism, this conference. This chap was sentenced for terrorism offences. He tried to murder a Christian evangelist, Hatan Tash, and any other Christians he could find there. And he was radicalized by converting to Islam in prison, and that was what got him into that whole thing. Here's another chap who was killed in another asylum seeker and attempted to kill his housemate, and the judge said it's a terrorist act. And the judge, enlightened judge for once, said when you attempted to kill Javed Louis, it was also intended to punish him for converting to Christianity because that's not permitted by the Muslim faith. Good for the judge recognizing that, because you probably know that apostasy laws in Islam. So, and actually it's very dangerous for Christians to convert to Islam in this country. I was talking to someone only in the last few weeks who has converted from Islam to Christianity, and she's faced all sorts of threats and intimidation from people in her workplace and also in the street. Butchers sort of go, doing signs against her and this kind of thing. And we helped her to move and move location and change towns and all of that kind of thing, and re-establish herself somewhere else where she's not known to have formerly been a Muslim. It's not safe in this country now for converts from Islam. So how are we doing for time? I'll probably need to maybe go a bit faster through this. This basically says Islam is the primary terrorism threat in the country, and accounts for most of the terrorist load and most of the investigations and most of the convictions as well. They reckon about 400 people who went to fight for Islamic State have come back to the UK and are at large and pose a security risk to us. Recently, one of our asylum seekers, there are lots of stories like this, was told he could stay in the UK to teach his son about Islam. I mean, extraordinary, because he should be deported, but no, he's got to be able to teach his son about Islam, so he's allowed to stay in the country. Meanwhile, this lady was detained for 6 hours, questioned for 4 hours when she tried to enter the country. She said they asked me if I was a Christian extremist, asked me how I feel about running over people with cars, because that's what Christians do, don't you know? She handed out leaflets saying Allah is gay, Allah is trans, responding to an article claiming Jesus was gay. It was a kind of like she wanted to test out the free speech implications that people are free to say Jesus is gay. So what about this? She says Allah is gay. She was given a lifetime ban from entering Britain. A lifetime ban for that. Nobody is being given a lifetime ban for insulting Christianity, right? You get a lifetime ban for insulting Allah in this country. That is, that says a lot about who we're afraid of insulting in this country. And on free speech generally, you probably remember Salman Rushdie's book, the Satanic Verses, 1989. That was when we all learnt what a fatwa was. That was when we all learnt that we had an Islamic community that was dangerous. He had to live in hiding under police protection for 10 years, and most politicians criticised him rather than criticising the incitement to violence. The Archbishop of Canterbury at the time proposed extending blasphemy laws to Islam. That was the reaction of the visible church. And of course, he was attacked again in 2022, lost the sight of one eye and the loss of a hand after a stabbing. And that kind of introduced us to, gosh, you need to be careful about Islam in Britain. That was 30 plus years ago now. I've got a copy of this book here at home, and it's called The Short Guide to Islam. And it's published by Oxford University Press. And there's a blank page in the book, and it says in the blank page, there's a little note to say, in the first edition of this book, we had an illustration of famous manuscript in Edinburgh University Library. Although the manuscript is widely regarded as a masterpiece and often reproduced, a small number of readers found the picture blasphemous. So what did Oxford University Press do? They imposed a blasphemy law on themselves and censored the picture. That's the picture that they censored. And basically publishing now is self-censoring in terms of when it comes to Islam and criticizing Islam. In case you thought the European Court of Human Rights would protect you, it won't protect you, because an Austrian woman was convicted of insulting Muhammad in Austria. She appealed to the Court of Human Rights, and the court said she intended to convey that Muhammad is not an object worthy of worship, and the European Court of Human Rights upheld the ruling, saying her remarks were capable of putting at risk religious peace. So it did not protect her right to freedom of speech in relation to what she said. We have a definition of Islamophobia proposed by an all-party parliamentary group, APPG on British Muslims, which defines Islamophobia as rooted in racism and a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. You can probably immediately see all the problems of that definition. Islam is not a race, so Islamophobia should not be defined as rooted in racism or a type of racism. And what is Muslimness? Who knows what that is? It could be how you dress, it could be what you believe, it could be what you practice. And if you're in any doubt, perceived Muslimness catches anything anyway. As long as someone perceives it as Islamophobic, it is Islamophobic. So people have been accused of Islamophobia for all sorts of things. And this basically, where adopted, will inhibit free speech. I wrote this report about that definition last year. Richard Dawkins, you may have heard of, was kind enough to write the foreword to the report. This definition, in spite of those obvious problems, has been adopted by most of our mainstream political parties. So the Labour Party, which is the party in power now, all Labour MPs are governed by a code of conduct that actually includes the APPG definition. So they could be suspended, disciplined, thrown out of the party for insulting Islam. So basically, most of our MPs are beholden to an Islamic blasphemy code as it stands today, right? And loads of councils as well have adopted it, and various other organisations. There have been, the government's had to admit that that definition is a breach of our Equality Act. So they've now set up another working group to tasked with drawing up an official government definition of anti-Muslim hatred stroke Islamophobia. The chap who chairs this group wrote the foreword to that APPG report proposing that definition, and the definition says it must even protect non-Muslim victims of Islamophobia, which is extraordinary, and it has to take into account Muslim views but no one else's views, and find a definition. There's actually a call for evidence about this that went live last week, which we're trying to encourage people to respond to, and we're working hard with other people to try and stop the government adopting a definition. And there's a lot more I could say about that. On films, there's a massive protest against a film called Lady of Heaven, and so they pulled the film. So who's going to do a film about Islam now? Nobody. You won't do a film about Islam in Britain. In schools, this chap, not the chap picture, there's no one pictured
Mm.
there, but he taught a lesson about free speech, and the lesson he showed a cartoon of Muhammad, and we all learned you don't have free speech in relation to Islam because um, he was then threatened, had to go into hiding. He remains in hiding to this day.
Mm.
And we all learned you don't have freedom of speech when it comes to Islam in Britain. This chap, university professor, was teaching about human rights, and he criticised human rights in all sorts of places, including Islamic countries. And the Islamic Society complained he is Islamophobic, and made all sorts of allegations about him. There were threats to his life, serious enough to say the police advised him to leave his home, which he had to do. And eventually he was exonerated by the university of doing anything wrong, but the university still scrapped the section from that course about Islam, basically capitulating to the demands of the Islamic mob. So what academic now is going to teach a course that risks criticizing Islam? You're not going to see it in any of our universities in Britain, and I know people who have gone abroad in order to study Islam rather than risk trying to do it here in Britain. We had a man charged with burning a book, which is not an offence. But if it's the Quran, you better watch out because you'll get arrested and charged for that. Another chap was convicted of burning a Quran. The original charge said that intent to cause against the religious institution of Islam harassment, alarm, or distress, as if that is an offence in this country, which would be a blasphemy offence. After complaints, they dropped that charge, but he was still convicted of a public order offence, which he's going to appeal for burning a copy of the Quran in public. He wouldn't be convicted of burning any other book in public. This chap broadcast a death threat to a more moderate imam, and the victim is now in hiding in Europe and warned by police it's too dangerous for him to visit the UK. You get the idea about what's happening. This school had a bomb threat over banning students from wearing pro-Palestinian badges to school. They had to close the school early after the threats to staff. Police had to come to school and hire private security, and teachers feared for their safety. Another school here had a campaign to allow Islamic prayer in the playground. They fought against it. There was a bomb threat, bricks thrown through a teacher's window. In the end, they won the case, which is a significant victory. They did not have to allow Muslim prayers in that school, but the battle was very significant in our culture, and and shows the pressure on schools to capitulate to Islamic demands. Hatan Tash, as the evangelist I mentioned earlier, she's been assaulted while preaching, and the police have arrested her wrongfully several times because it's easier to arrest her than deal with the mob who are actually committing an offence, and she's not committing an offence. We've helped her get thousands of pounds of compensation from the police for wrongful arrest, but they persist in arresting her. She was stabbed and nearly killed, but fortunately it missed her arteries. And but she's so bold, she's seen over 1,000 Muslims convert to Christianity,
Wow.
including 120 imams. Um, So, do you want to stop there for questions, or
You,
because I can go on to a different kind of way of talking about the attractions of Islam and so on like that? You want to pause for questions now?
uh, we've got, we still have an hour, at least till 4 that I've got booked. So if you'd like to continue, Tim, there's a
Okay.
lot of material here, and you'll be able to make available this presentation as well.
Yeah.
I believe
Um,
we'll share that. But yeah,
yeah.
continue.
Okay. This is an image of an Eid festival in Birmingham. 140,000 Muslims celebrating Eid there. Again, there are no Christian festivals anything like that big in Britain. Um, so people are attracted to Islam. That is the truth. And why are they attracted? Well, one is it's a simple religion. It's a simple creed, simple scriptures, simple theology. There's no complicated Trinity that nobody understands, no one can explain. There's no atonement, there's no incarnation, all this complex stuff. It's dead simple and easy to understand. That people are attracted to that. It's an easy religion because you've got 5 things to do and that's it. Tick, tick, tick. If you do those 5 things, you're in. You've done it. So everyone knows whether you've done the right things or not. And in a sense, it's the easiest religion in the world to join. You just have to recite the Shahada, and the hardest one in the world to leave. Um, it's a moral religion, or at least it's perceived as moral. No alcohol, no adultery, no stealing, clear penalties in this life and the next. Um, and so it's perceived as a very moral religion, and people are attracted to morality, and they see all of the Western's immorality, Western culture's immorality, and so on, and debauchery and so on, and so they're attracted to Islam for that reason. It's a recent religion. It's more modern. People have this idea that modern is better. It's got built-in defenses against Christianity, um, and um, and so it appears more relevant for being more recent. It's a masculine religion as well. It's a religion for men, by men. Christianity is seen as effeminate. Islam is seen as masculine. People like Andrew Tate, of course, has converted to Islam, and and sort of says it's a strong religion. Respect it because it's strong and masculine. That's People are attracted to that. And it's a reverent religion. Look what they're doing there. They're bowing down and kneeling in prayer. You don't see Christians bowing down and kneeling in prayer. You just see Christians dancing around, happy clappy, not looking like they're taking it very seriously.
Mm.
These guys look like they're taking it very seriously, and people are attracted to that. That's one of the reasons why people are attracted to Islam. And then, on the nature of Islam, it's a holistic religion. It covers the whole of life, family, culture, um, nations, world, no distinction between religion and society in
Right.
that sense. Um, and it's a missional religion. It aims to expand and grow and convert people, but also is more interested in um, territory
Yeah.
really than people. It aims to expand territorial influence and so on. It's a militant religion as well. Jihad. There's a chapter in my book called "Is Islam a Religion of Peace?" I refer you to that for
Right.
more information. It's an intolerant religion as well. It doesn't tolerate conversion away from Islam, and doesn't tolerate insults of Islam and criticism of Islam and so on. Of course, the most significant persecution of Muslims in the world is at the hands of Islam. Islamic countries dominate the countries where you see the most persecution of Christians around the world. Um, and you can compare the sort of caliphate, the Islamic kingdom, if you like, with the kingdom of God. And you see the Islamic Caliphate is kind of like this: visible, political, based on rules and regulation, based on Arabic culture, and expands by force and so on, all of which contrast with the kingdom of God, which is invisible and relational and separates church and state, moral and spiritual principles, transcends culture, spans by choice, focuses there, it's created and maintained by God. And people often ask, could Islam have a reformation? Well, Anna Hirsi Ali, who's been mentioned, of course, she's now converted to Christianity since she wrote this book. But um, as you'll know, the Protestant Reformation was about recovering the authority of the Bible and led to free and fair societies because that reflects the teaching of the Bible. Whereas Islam, if you have a Reformation, you're going back to the original
Right.
teaching of Islam, which is not encouraging free and fair societies. And in fact, we are now seeing a reformation of Islam in the likes of Hamas, Al Qaeda, ISIS, and so on. They are going back to the text and finding what they find about Muhammad and his behavior and all of the rules and so on. And that is the reformation of Islam, and it is happening today. So, a few comments on how we
Yeah.
can respond. The only effective response to radical Islam is radical Christianity. Islam's only really been halted by radical Christians who are bold and courageous in responding to it. We talk about exposing Islam whilst loving Muslims. And I'll talk about the 5 pillars of responding to Islam. Number one, pray, because this is ultimately a spiritual battle, primarily a spiritual battle. Pray in the spirit on all occasions, all kinds of prayer requests. We are engaged in a spiritual battle when it comes to Islam, and we need to be full of prayer about it and praying into it. Number two, love, because Jesus said, love your enemies and pray for those that persecute you. So we should love Muslims and recognize that they are the biggest victims in many ways of Islam, and it affects their eternal destiny, and they're tied up in a legalistic, false religion. confront. Um, Paul said, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought. Well, of course, Islam is a pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, so we should confront it and demolish its arguments and all of those kind of things, apologetics kind of stuff. And we should expose what Islam is doing in relation to its treatment of women and
Mm.
grooming gangs and all of that kind of thing. Have nothing to do with fruitless, but expose them, and finally resist it where we can in courts and legal action and so on, as we have done at certain points through Christian Concerned Legal Centre here, and try and preserve Christian and just laws and principles. And I have 10 policy recommendations to sort of conclude with here. We could ban these Sharia councils, as you've done in Canada. We could enforce the registration of marriages. This is a whole other problem that we have Muslims getting married not under British law, and then if the man divorces, leaves, or dies, the woman has no rights. If you force registration of marriages, that would stop that and also stop polygamy. You could ban face veils, as has been done in 16
Mm.
countries around the world. You could tighten marriage visa rules. You could ensure the police enforce the law equally regardless of culture, religion, or ethnicity. We should stop promoting Islamic finance. We should
Mhm.
identify the nation as a Christian country. We should robustly defend free speech. We should ban foreign funding of Islam, and we should cut levels of immigration. Um, None of these things are actually being done. I first proposed these things nearly 10 years ago, and we need a much stronger, more robust response than we've had in order to see these things start to happen. So, with that, I'll stop there and open up for your questions and comments.
Well, yeah, thank you very much, Tim, and we'll open it up now. There's a lot to digest there, but I think it's material we've been aware these things are happening, but helpful to have it put in a context. And I think certainly experience in Britain, there's much to be learned from for certainly what we're dealing with here in Canada and elsewhere, but also learn more about kind of how Christian concern and others like you can offer effective resistance against very considerable odds. Um, let's open up though, and please comments, questions.
Mhm.
Just put your hand up or just speak up and mute yourself and speak. And we've got certainly, ample time for questions. So please go ahead.
Maybe I could start by asking
Yeah.
a question. Tim, you indicate that a lot of the difficulty is related to uneven enforcement of the law, for example,
Yeah.
where things are very asymmetrical.
Yeah.
And when you raise that issue, what kind of a reaction do you get? Are people sympathetic to the fact that the law should be equally enforced, or are they thinking that no, no, this is a valid place to have an exception, or what kind of reaction do you get?
I mean, most people in our society would think, yes, there should be one law for all, and yeah, there's this whole thing
Mhm.
about two-tier policing that has become a big thing in our politics now, post some riots last year where the police were seen to run away from Islamic crowds, and where the police were clamping down on criticism of Islam whilst not clamping down on other other things in the same way. And the initial response has been denial from politicians and police, just blanket denial. There's no such thing as two-tier policing. It doesn't happen, and so on. But then more recently, the sentencing council um, proposed in writing that if you have a minority status of some kind, then that should be taken into account in sentencing, which is obviously two-tier justice, because that means people with certain minority characteristics would not be sentenced in the same way as other people without those characteristics. And this caused a fuss. The Home Secretary was, actually had a battle with them and said, no, 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 you can't do this. This is two-tier justice. And and then the judges stood up to and said, no, we want this. This is what we should do. And so the government is having to actually change the law to force them to actually have the law as it should be, equal
Mm.
between people. and therefore basically forced to admit that there is two-tier justice, or the proposal is to have
Right.
two-tier justice, or the judges want two-tier justice. And this is all about us being captured really by kind of woke cultural Marxism, whatever you call it, kind of
Yeah.
ideology that prioritizes people with various characteristics and victim status and so on, and says that we've got to sort of compensate for that. But people are very angry about it and very upset about it generally. And the government, whilst in a sense denying it, is very keen not to, not to be seen to be advocating or promoting or encouraging two-tier law. Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, is called two-tier Keir,
Yeah.
and he obviously doesn't like that. So, um, so does that answer your question? Yeah,
I have a question.
yeah,
Yes, Crystal.
Yeah, Tim, thank you very much for this presentation. It's a lot of work, but it's also very alarming wake-up call for us all. My question is, why do you think Western countries, Britain in particular, are drawing radical Muslims and even breeding them? While it, I mean, we have heard warnings from the Arab Peninsula against this, saying they're going to you. And I now hear that the second and third generation Muslims born in the UK are so much more radical than parents. Why is that so? I have my own ideas, but I'd like to hear from you. The second thing that is maybe ties in with that, if you think of the grooming gang scandal,
Right.
yeah,
I don't know, the numbers, I've heard different numbers. Some run into the hundreds of thousands, but
yeah.
I don't see this happening in, for instance, Ethiopia or Kenya. And I know why it will not happen there. The African people will simply burn the place down. You will not go and rape their women. So what has happened to the West that we attracted and that we are such an easy prey?
Yeah, I think, well, I'll be interested to hear your views, Christo, on this. I think that we've lost our way in terms of what our values are and what our culture is. We've adopted this idea of multiculturalism, that all cultures are equally valid and we should be a multicultural society. This goes back to Tony Blair, really, who opened the door initially to immigration and said it will be good for the country. And many of the political elites still believe that and want that and think that is the best thing for the country and the best thing for the economy, and the economy can't survive without mass immigration, all of this kind of thing. That's part of the factor. We we just kind of refuse to believe that Islam can be bad. It must be a misunderstanding of Islam to view it as radical. That no politician will, well, few politicians will dare say that it's Islam. They'll say, oh, it's nothing to do with Islam. Islam is a peace. The mantra gets chanted out every time there's a terrorist attack or something like that. And the liberal elite just won't believe that Islam is really the problem here. And with the grooming gangs in particular, that's still, people are very, very, very aware of saying that. So that's a whole nother factor, and people are terrified of being called racist or Islamophobic. And so when something is caused by Islam or Pakistanis or something like that, then people are very, very scared of tackling it because they don't want to be called racist. They don't want to be assumed, given that allegation. So they avoid it. So we've lost our moral foundation as a country, and that's lost our ability to really stand up to it and so on. But what do you think? That's my sort of perspective.
I agree with what you say. I think there are also other additional factors. One is that I think the decadence of Western culture provokes Muslims. All countries have decadence, of course. We are not the only sinful lands, but there is an arrogance and in your face decadence in the West.
Right.
That's one thing. there is weakness. Muslims do not respect weakness. I'm just reading a book on In the Path of Allah about the early conquests, and it's all based on contemporary reports from the 7th century. It's interesting to see how the Armenians drove them back, and they immediately had respect for the Armenians. In some places, Christians just surrendered and paid tribute, and thinking that they would benefit, but the Muslims don't have any respect for that. So that is certainly the weakness. Then there is the long game. They have dreamed of worldwide Sharia. They have dreamed of taking Europe. Europe is now weak, and inviting them in, and their radical organizations like Muslim Brotherhood is banned in their own countries, like many. So what do they see? They see the radicals have a haven. And I think if you take it as a 14th century project, they see this is our moment. We must take it now. You remember that Gaddafi predicted.
Yes, but that's all the Muslim motivation, which I agree with. But I was also sort of thinking about why Britain is allowing it to happen, why the West is allowing it to happen.
And so they say that they see this is the moment. But so a combination, and of course the most important thing is that we have no vision. People die for a lack of vision. And that is why I believe things can be turned around. But not only must people be converted, they must go back to church, and the liberal pastors must be thrown out, and the gospel must be preached again. And I think that's the only hope. Like in the 18th century revivals, that's the only hope now. No political deal will make it, although we must continue to pray and vote and so on. But ultimately, it's a spiritual battle, I believe.
I agree.
Yeah. I'd like to kind of hook into that, because I think it's not emphasized enough that the weakness of the church and the deconstruction of many churches are a big part in the cause for this to happen. And I would almost say that among many churches today, there's this illusion that the God of the Old Testament is not the same God as now. If I read what God did in the Old Testament to Israel, it says, "You continue to walk away from me. I will give you over to Satan. I will give you over to Assyria, so that you may experience what it is to live with my blessings." And I see this happening over hundreds of years in the Western world. And this in England, we've seen that to a large extent. Everything that was a Christian was more and more bad and evil, and that has come to a climax. And I think the evidence is very clear. So that's one aspect. And the other aspect is mentioned by your own Tom Holland, who says, Christianity is tolerant, is open to the weak, wants to be gentle and nice, and revenge is to the Lord and not to us. And so for a violent religion where Allah is not the final judge, but is calling all people up to a jihad in order to fight for him, and if they don't want to pay the taxes, to decapitate them, it's very easy prey. So I think it's both of those components. It's the deconstruction of the church. It's God giving the Western nations over and say, okay, enough is enough. You hate me, you hate my word, you hate my church. I will give you over to that. And so there's two things. And I liked at the end the points that you said what the church has to do. But I think indeed what Christo says is, when we look at solutions, we shouldn't say, oh, we have to climb the mountains, we have to recapture education, we have to recapture politics. We can only do so if God is on our side, and God will only be on our side if we're very clearly teaching without any compromise, without any apology, the true word of God, which means that we call a spade in Islam, but also in the churches that are deconstructing and refuse to call evil evil.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And,
Here too.
just looking at Deuteronomy 28, verse 43, amongst the
Right.
curses, the foreigners who reside among you will rise above you higher and higher, but you will sink lower and lower. They will lend to you, but you will not lend to them. They will be the head, you will be the tail. That's exactly what's happening.
Right.
But we have to remember, I do think it is God's judgment, element of God's judgment, but I also want to remember that the purpose of God's judgment is to bring us to repentance.
Yeah.
That is the aim. Now the question is when that will come or how long it will take for that to come. I don't really see signs of that at the moment, although there is talk of this quiet revival. Have you heard about that in Canada or not?
In England, in Britain.
Yes, yeah. So
I haven't heard much about that. Maybe you could just elaborate, or rather, I mean, quite recently, or is it the quiet revival that you're talking of?
well, the Bible Society did a report comparing people's attendance of church from I think it was 6 years ago, so pre-COVID to now,
Yeah,
and found that amongst young people it jumped significantly, went from like 4% right up to 12% or something like that. And when went up, in some cases up higher than that. Amongst older people, it didn't really change very much. If anything, slightly declined. But amongst young people, there is a kind of quiet revival, to use that term, and a
yeah,
lot of young people are really finding faith and getting very enthusiastic about it. Bible sales are
yeah,
through the roof. Especially youth Bibles are through the roof.
right.
Youth sales of youth Bibles and so on. So that's the only sort of sign of hope in a way that I see, that maybe the next generation is going to bring us back to repentance and to Christ and so on. But until and unless that happens, we're going to see more and more of this kind of judgment and God handing us over. And of course, here in this country as well, in parallel, last week alone, we
Very,
voted to legalize abortion right up to birth, and we voted to legalize euthanasia as well, or
yeah,
assisted suicide, which I know you already have in your country. So
yeah, we're on that path.
that's also part of the judgment as well, of course. At the same time, we turn away from our Christian morals, and God hand us over to that. So yes, this is all part of what's happening. Yeah.
Your point about radical Christianity, I mean, I think is important if we really understand what that means, and that there's the call to conversion is also a call to make disciples of the nations, and that there is a command to bring all areas of life under the rule of Christ's law through the
Yeah.
preaching of the gospel. And I
Yeah.
guess we really need a boot camp or a training for future leaders. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of homework and a lot of preparation that needs to be done to have leaders that can really navigate through this with the courage and the compassion and understanding that's needed. And I think probably some of our eschatologies are, just kind of escapist ones that have Christians who really sort of said, well, this is the way it's going to be. God will come back and Christ will return and fix it. But we absolve ourselves of responsibility for what, really has happened under our watch as Christians. And it's quite striking. The early church transformed the Roman world. Here, in just 2 generations, we've given up the Christian message. So
Yeah.
a lot at play. And you're right in terms of God's judgment that when we turn our back on God, that's a serious thing. And any student of the Old Testament and New would realize that is the case. So I guess, are there leaders in particular, Tim, there in the UK and here also, who are really providing the kind of teaching and understanding, equipping Christians to understand the culture, the issues, the application of the gospel to those matters? Now, I know Christian Concern is doing a lot. I mean, you're tackling the key issues. How much support do you have from churches broadly? Like
We have quite a lot of support from churches of lots of different kinds.
right,
Pentecostal, charismatic to very highly conservative
yeah,
evangelical churches as well. And we've got 90,000 people on our email list,
wow,
and we're starting to also expand internationally to some degree with fledgling operations in Colombia, South Africa, South Korea, Nepal, and one or two
Yeah.
other countries. And we've become now probably the leading Christian ministry talk about Islam in Britain, which is not particularly where I want to be. There was another organization called Barnabas Fund that was leading the way in this before. They've sadly fallen apart for all sorts of horrible reasons. And anyway, so Christian Concern is now leading on this. Most other Christian advocacy organizations have not tackled Islam,
Right.
either through fear or through feeling like they don't have the expertise, which is another kind of fear in a way. Some of them are starting to wake up now and starting to say we need to talk about this a bit, which is encouraging and good. And we'll see where this goes. But there is an issue that most people are still avoiding the subject, avoiding talking about it and don't want to talk about it and all that kind of thing, or feel like they can't talk about it as well. So it's still a big issue, that, in terms of people just having the courage to say, whenever I speak about this
Courage. Yeah.
to an audience in Britain, one of the first questions I always get, not necessarily one of the first, one of the questions I always get is, aren't you scared? Have you had attacks? Have you had death threats? You're so brave. And I have to say, actually, I'm probably speaking out more than anyone else in this room, perhaps, but I haven't had any actual death threats, right? It's not actually dangerous. You're all too afraid. Actually, you just need to step out there and say something, and nothing will happen to you, most likely. It's all right. I'm obviously not speaking out loud enough or bold enough. Fine. Well, I'm doing what I can. But people are just cowed, and they look at me and think, "Wow, you're so brave." Well, maybe I'm a little bit brave, but you know, and courage begets courage, hopefully, and so hopefully I'm inspiring some people to speak out and be a bit bolder as well. But we just need people who are just not afraid to speak the truth and decide in their hearts, well, I'll take whatever comes because God is in control anyway.
Yeah. No, excellent. And I would certainly encourage everyone to get a copy of certainly Tim's recent book, and also this one is extremely helpful in terms of engaging Muslim friends and contacts, and I think it'll be useful for so many Christians on campus as well. So do that. That's very encouraging. The material there is extremely helpful. And I certainly encourage everyone to go to the Christian Concern website, and the issues around euthanasia and abortion and other ones are ones we're grappling with as well here, very much so. And I think aligning with Christian Concern, I think certainly there are organizations here in Canada as well. I think still very fragmented. We've got a lot of good work happening, but there's not a coherent, perhaps, movement yet to the effect, of really changing how our culture is very being salt and light in our culture. But very, very helpful and very encouraging, Tim, to see the work you're doing, and I'll certainly encourage all that I'm in contact with to study your books, and I think that will in itself empower people. I know I know Christo and Isa have also been working in this area, and I think others here as well. So these are valuable resources. I think some of the best that I've seen yet to help Christians engage, in meaningful exchange with Muslim friends in a position of love, but an understanding that really we're dealing with a false religion, perhaps even a cult that really people need to be freed from. And I guess the conversion that's happening in many Muslim countries, and here also among Muslims, because that's one of the most dangerous things, is to be a Muslim who converts to Christianity, and they need a lot of support as well. I don't know if there's organizations yet for such persons, or they just find what help they can get through your organization and others. Are there any, I guess, Christian leaders currently that have really picked up the challenge as you've laid it down? You mentioned your 10 points. That was done some years ago, and as yet, there's been really no action on those items.
No. I mean, everyone talks about cutting immigration, but it never actually happens.
Yeah,
So every manifesto has tried to said we'll do this in the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 elections, and all that's happened is immigration has increased, for example, and some of the other example things there are too politically incorrect
right,
at the moment for people to talk about and consider,
right,
really. But I think we'll have to get there one day
right.
if we're not going to be fully
Yeah,
taken over by Islam, become an Islamic country. Um, so we'll see. And there is. Do you guys are aware of Jay Smith? Probably you are.
mm,
And there, and he organised a conference called the North Atlantic Polemics Conference here in
mm,
London
right,
last month. I spoke at it, but he also had other people like God Logic and Apostate Prophet and all these various people who are doing good work and apologetics about Islam and also doing the historical critique of the existence of Muhammad and all of that kind of thing. So there's a bit of a growth now of people
right.
rising to the challenge of Islamic apologetics, at least. I think the political challenge is there are less
Yeah,
people rising to that challenge, but
yeah,
the apologetic challenge we're seeing more of that. And yeah,
right.
there's a few hundred people who came to that conference, and I think it will grow and expand. That was the second one that he did this year.
What's the conference, Tim?
North Atlantic Polemics Conference.
Okay, yeah, put that in the chat there. The Jordan Peterson has his ARC conference now 2 times in England, but doesn't seem to engage at this level. I don't know.
Well, I went to ARC last year.
Yeah,
I I I decided about 5 times not to go, and finally did go
yeah,
because somebody gave me their ticket. They couldn't make it after all.
yeah,
And I made some great connections with
yeah.
people, including Mark Dury was there. Do you know, he's a very good scholar on Islam. Um,
Okay,
and some other top scholars on Islam were there, but from the front, nothing was said about Islam. And in fact, there were some high-profile Muslim guests there. And at the moment, they're not ready to tackle it. But I did hand out some copies of my book there. It was just recently published, and one of the organizers then subsequently invited me to speak to one of his
excellent.
groups and clearly understands the issue and clearly is is I mean, I don't know where that will go, but it ARC does not identify as a Christian conference,
Yeah,
although they do have some very good, very solid Christian speakers like Os Guinness there. They
right.
also have Jordan Peterson, who is really a mishmash of psychologizing the
Yeah,
Bible, and various other people who aren't Christians as well. And I don't think they can ever succeed without Christianity, really.
yeah,
So, and I don't know whether they're going to realize that or not, but that they ultimately that's what they need. And unless you have Christianity, you're not going to have really, I don't think, the boldness and courage to really
yeah,
tackle Islam either. So
for
we'll
sure.
see. But I did find it very good for networking, not least
Yeah,
in relation to Islam as it happened as well.
for sure. Yeah, we had
Don?
Professor David. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, and I don't know if it sounds right, but to kind of put two things in balance, because when we're dealing with Islam, we're also dealing with Muslims, and there's
Yeah,
two things, of course. At the
Yeah,
one side is Islam and its threat, because it's a false religion, it's a work of Satan. But on the other hand, within Iran, for instance, within the Muslim world, but even among the immigrants here,
right.
there's so many people coming to Christ, and
Yes.
and so that's the other side. So
Mhm.
we got to love the Muslim,
Right.
but being aware of the radical roots and the danger of what they
Right.
are actually, yeah, hooked into, awares of or unawares.
Yeah.
But we have in our house, we've hosted three young guys or young men who have no fairly recently, turned from Islam to Christianity, and
Yes.
there's a lot of that happening, and there's reports in Iran particularly of
Right.
of large numbers of people turning to Christianity, and so I think we got to
hit the
balance
big,
the fear for the satanic things that are in Islam. With the other side is
yeah,
really being open and equipped to talk to Muslims in a loving way about who Jesus is and the only way to real salvation and peace with God. And I think, and you did mention it, but I think it's important to put those two things over and against each other. Most churches don't really want to deal with what Islam is really
yeah,
about in the roots. And I guess some of them they just want to say it doesn't really matter,
yeah,
it doesn't make
yeah,
a lot of difference, and then they're totally out of,
right,
but there is a way to really, yeah, lovingly and helping them to really get to know Christianity in the context of, or over
for sure.
against Islam.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and I think Tim's books, the two books, and the ones that he also did with Beth Peltola, really would be excellent books for study at church, a study group, at the very least,
Yeah.
get Christians, because then it's not, it makes it accessible. It's not this
Yeah.
huge thing called Islam that you don't really know anything about, but it breaks it down and gives you avenues to connect in ways that are very meaningful, as you've said. And I think that's really, that is, Paul says, not ashamed of the gospel because it's the power of God unto salvation. And that's really where we need to. I guess it is the case that churches that have gone woke lack any inner core and really are susceptible. But there is a revival in many ways. And ultimately, as God said, that his word will prevail, and we need to work in that confidence.
Yeah.
So I think yes, please, Bill.
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with this book by Tom Wallace.
Tom Wallace. What
Yeah,
has it done? I'm not, but
he has a radio program called Fortress of Faith.
okay, Tom Wallace.
In fact, that's his website as well, fortressoffaith.org.
If you put that in the chat, yes, that would
Yeah,
be
and
great.
he's been speaking out against Islam for quite a while. He used to live in Bellingham, Washington. I think he's in Charlotte, North
Hmm.
Carolina now. But what he does is he
Okay.
takes Sharia law.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's about 1,000 pages.
Yeah.
yeah,
And the first 370 pages are about the religion, and the rest of it is about politics and how to wipe your ass and everything else you can think of. No, seriously. And how they live their lives. And what he does in this,
shooting.
Oh, I
Yeah,
see.
which is
So
very, very
opening that
helpful,
book up, is he? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
is he doesn't criticize Muhammad or the Quran or anything like that. He goes right to the Return of the Traveler, and he's picked the best verses from Return of the Traveler, and not Return,
yeah.
Reliance on the Traveler. Sorry, Reliance on
Okay,
the
yeah,
Traveler, and he's put that in this book. So this is what you refute because this is their Sharia law. It's not
Yeah.
their faith.
Yeah.
yeah.
It's not their faith. It's not Muhammad. It's not the Quran. But
It's the application.
it's the application. It's
Yeah.
the practice. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's very helpful. Also, have you contacted Bill Warner? He's done a lot of
Yeah. I've read some of his books. Yeah.
very objective work
Yeah. Helpful.
where he quantifies the fact that Islam is not a religion of peace, but a religion of
For sure.
war.
Yeah,
And he's quantified it. He's done some wonderful work.
there are resources like that for sure. Very
Yeah.
important.
One of the things that I wonder about, in fact, we were praying about this the other day, is I'm not God. In
Oh,
the Testament, it says, your ways are higher than my ways, and your thoughts are higher than my thoughts. And I can't begin to think like God. But I try to imagine God looking down on earth like he did in Genesis when he looked down at Noah's era.
great.
And he saw evil continually in the hearts of everybody except Noah and his sons and their families. And he wiped them all out and basically started over.
Yeah.
Realistically, is it possible for humans to turn this thing around? I don't know how it's possible. The seminaries in North America have gone liberal.
Mm.
A lot of them aren't preaching the Bible anymore.
Yeah.
I just don't know how it can be done. And turn the
Well, I
cheek,
think
pray for
our
those that persecute you. Just
yeah. I think our generation has failed and has largely been captured by the whole woke agenda and so on, and has kind of given up or conceded the ground pretty much. And so we have to now invest in the next generation. That's really what
Right.
we have to do, and we have to get them really going for it and on fire and unashamed and bold and confident and all of that kind of thing. That the hope has got to be the next generation now,
You're right.
that they
Yep.
come out boldly and strongly and unashamed and confidently preaching the truth. And it
Yes.
will mean new institutions or
Right.
possibly revive institutions, but ultimately it will mean new institutions. There's a bit of a movement in this country, for example, to set up Christian schools,
Right.
because all of the sexualization of children in schools in this country, more and more parents are sort of saying we can't have this. I won't send my children to that kind of school, and so they're stepping out in faith to set up their own school of some kind, and also homeschooling as well, which is going on as well. And some of that is backed by churches recognizing that we need to take back this ground as well, because the churches originally set up schools across the West and in Britain as well, and they've all been handed over basically to the state now. So that, I think strategically that is where we need to go largely. The next generation is where we need to go with it. And like I mentioned, the quiet revival, that's the hope in a way probably now, for the West, that the next generation rises up and says no more of this.
You're right. And I think the new institutions that will come with that, or the new kind of wineskins that will be needed. And
yeah, we need new universities. There is one setting up here, which is very boldly going non-state funded to set up a Christian university. There are more of that kind of thing in the States than there is here. But this is what we need. We need to sort of start afresh in a way. With all of these things, and churches need to get a vision for recapturing the culture and not just doing evangelism and not just hiding away and being pietists and saying, well, as long as we can preach the gospel, we're okay, which is a mentality that is quite prevalent in some aspects of the church here in the UK, but saying no, the church needs to reclaim these things and so on. So yeah, and there are some signs of that. I mean, I went to a church this last week in Norwich, not a big town, and they've got a now brand new purpose-built church that seats 1,500 people, and they've got a vision. They've already got a nursery school in there and a social supermarket, and they've got a vision for starting a school and then a Christian medical centre as well, because we need to, so we can't leave it all to the NHS, so there are some people that are starting to think like this and starting to take action on it as well. So, that's the hope, that we get people who are willing to boldly, courageously stand up and do this.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate your time, Tim. Other comment?
Yeah, quick question. The group that's hoping to set up a non-government funded Christian university in the UK.
Yeah.
Do you have any pointers to them?
Yeah, I'll give you the link. Selborne College.
And
here it is.
I'll send out all the material in the chat. Yeah.
Okay, we've got it there. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'll share that info with everyone. Make sure, I think I've got everyone's email, but if I don't, make sure you put it in the chat as well.
Hello, Don, just quickly.
Yep.
Just want to show the brothers my book. It is now newly
excellent.
Yeah, new title, Fatal Invitation, and under a pseudonym.
Oh.
Because I travel in Africa, and Open Doors recommended that I don't on it. So if you could also send a link to my book to the brothers that are here, and
excellent. Yeah,
I would so appreciate if Tim would consider making it known to Christian Concern. I was now asked to write a summary of it, a 30-page summary, and basically what is Dawah all about and what should we as Christians do.
Can you send me a link to that, please?
Good.
Yeah. Put it in the chat then. Yeah, I'll share that with everyone. Okay. Excellent, Christo. Yeah, that'll be very helpful.
And I want to add that Britain is very much on my heart
Mm,
I know the history a little bit of Britain, and I think this is probably one of the biggest challenges they have faced, as Tim also mentioned. So we pray for your country.
yes.
Please be assured of that.
Thank you. Thank
Your
you.
battle is our battle. We
Mm.
cannot
Yes.
sit here across the pond and think it will not come to us. So
Yeah,
we are with you in this battle.
indeed.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, and appreciate all your insights and the excellent work you're doing. Sounds really, really great. So yeah,
Excellent.
thank you. It's been a great conversation.
For sure. And we'll make sure to carry that on. I think I have everyone's email and all the information in the chat I will share. And this lecture has been recorded and also the discussion, so that'll be made available as well. And I think let's each think of ways that we can take this to where we are most active involved. I'm really concerned, in the university context that the real understanding historically of Islam is made available to students. And I think there's excellent resources, as has been shared here, and other scholars as well, that we can do that. And I guess to be bold, to take courage, the whole point they mentioned with Lewis, that we have men or people without chests, that when there is a lack of conviction as to what's a true truth and what's ultimately transcendental in terms of God and his redemption through Christ, we lose that. We do become totally malleable to the spirits of the age, and as we see, they're not good. But we know that God is sovereign and working in all aspects, and that he will bring glory to himself and to his church through the efforts of Christians to witness to the truth. And I thank you again, Tim, for your courageous witness. And we certainly want to hear more about Christian Concern, and I'll certainly share that information through my contacts as well. And perhaps have you over here to Canada at some point. That would be a well worth having for sure. Okay, final then I will share the chat notes with everyone. And Tim, I'll also have a copy of the recording of the lecture available as well in a few days. And
Great.
okay, all right. Blessings,
Thanks very much.
everyone. Yeah, thank
Thank
you
you.
indeed.
Thank you.
And we'll be in touch for sure.
Cheers. Thank you. All right.
Okay,
Bye. Bye.
bye. Steve, okay, there is good. I'll stay online here myself. Hey, Jerry.
Bye-bye.
Isla, yeah, that'll be Isla, as I mentioned. There'll be a link for the lecture. That's good. And Nathan, John, I'm not sure I've got your. Oh, that is that. Nathan, John, I'm not sure I've got your email, but that's okay. Krista, you're back.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. And when are you going to be going to Africa?
Beginning of September, Lord willing, for a month.
All right.
Yeah.
And we'll definitely want to connect with you before that. And your book, is that now available and published?
Yeah, the new edition on Amazon.
Okay, I'll definitely get that as well. Do you have either of Tim's books at this point?
I have the small one, not the new one on Britain.
Okay, the
Yeah,
challenge. Yeah.
I will get one. Yeah.
Okay.
They're not expensive as far as I know.
No, they're pretty reasonable, and yeah, I got the next day actually when I ordered them, so they're readily available. But yeah, they're excellent as well. And I think thinking about getting study groups going in churches, or at least we need to really raise the awareness of Christians. I think we have some excellent people here in our region to work with as well, but definitely would like to get these resources into the right hands. And I
Yeah.
don't know what university students just don't get exposed to this material
Mm.
very much. Your friend that's with you there, I missed his name, but
George.
Yeah.
George, okay. Maybe
Yeah.
put George's email in as well. I can keep him on my list for
I-
future events.
Actually, I do not have an email address,
All
but
right.
all
You're
my
good.
communication is done through Christo.
All right. Well, then we're good. Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
And
thank you so
we'll be
much
in touch.
for arranging this. I connected a few guys this afternoon, one from Germany, one from Oshawa, and
Mhm.
did you see the African brother? He was on.
Okay. But
Yeah,
he was there. Yeah.
Nobington, and so I connected a few brothers. Thank
Excellent.
you so
Well,
much for
that's,
doing this,
yeah.
Don.
Sorry?
Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, I'll keep at it. And I think, yeah, it's every bit helps. But I think also once we have the recording and the material related to this, we can use this material
Yeah.
elsewhere to help educate and encourage Christians. And I think, yeah, a lot of work to do, but I think God is raising up a new generation, and we do our best to pass on to them the best that we have.
Thank you
So,
very much.
all right, bless, and we will be in touch soon.
Okay, Don.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
I guess they prayed at the end. But anyway, I will get that book and you can read it.
My response to all of this, it's much better than I had anticipated. And what I mean by that, not better conditions, but it was not what I had anticipated. And now I realize the depth and the seriousness of this in the UK and by extension, the West. Okay. And I'm so thankful that I came and to hear these guys. And the antithesis of this is liberal churches. Many churches are in twilight zone. No idea. I would say our own included. And not that you're not trying.
But many people love to be in Twilight Zone.
Yeah, you don't have to think, they don't have to make decisions. But I think if I'm concerned for the body of Christ worldwide, my brothers and sisters in the Lord, no matter where they are, my assessment after all of this in the UK, many of the politicians have been gutless. And because of the gutlessness, the consequences are what we see. That's one. The other thing is what he was saying too. And the idea of